Everyone. My name is Christina, and I am an organizer with Mothering Justice Organization. Mothering Justice Organization is a grassroots policy advocacy nonprofit organization based in Detroit. And Mothering Justice is dedicated to bringing the decision-making power back to those most affected by it, which is a lot of mothers of color and women of color. And we are working on making sure that we are the ones held at the legislative process and knowing how to speak to lawmakers and just being aware to advocate for our communities on what our communities need most. In February 2023, the wonderful news is that Michigan workers earning hourly or tip wages will see an increase in their pay. And we are really excited for that news. The arrival of this key economic policy in Michigan has been fought for a long time, and it's been a long time coming, and it's about time for our Michigan workers who need it the most. 4 years ago, Mothering Justice, along with Rock United, partnered with the Broad-Based Diverse Coalition to create My Time to Care. We saw a common sense increase to wages for Michigan workers. And Mothering Justice and Rock are both Black women-led organizations that hosted this to make sure that this happened for Michigan workers. We collected over 400,000 signatures back in 2018. The coalition included so many different people across Michigan because Michigan is so huge. It took a lot of people to collect all of these signatures. We turned them in to have this policy put on the ballot back in 2018. And after we collected enough signatures to be eligible Michigan voters to place this on the ballot, the Republican-controlled legislature quickly and cynically adopted the proposal to Michigan law, then used their powers to gut it. So we say they chopped and screwed our policy law and put their own wording in there. And by doing that, it left out over 40% of Michigan workers having access to having a better minimum wage. This underhanded tactic is known as adopt and amend. The My Time to Care Coalition refused to let this injustice stand, and so went to court. We went to court back in July of 2022, and in the Court of Claims, it was ruled that it was unconstitutional the way that the Michigan legislature adopted and amended and gutted our policy language. Justice for Michigan workers took years, including 4 years, and lost increased wages for millions of workers across the Great Lakes state. The adopt and amend policy hurt people living under the poverty line, and the ALICE, which is the Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed Records individuals, it shows this. ALICE is an acronym used to represent the growing number of families who are unable to afford the basics of housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, and technology. To make things worse, inflation is at the highest it's been in over 40 years. We believe that this is a problem when you're living paycheck to paycheck. The cost of your groceries are going up, the cost of your utilities are going up, but your wages are not. And that is hurting so many millions of Michigan workers. The status quo forces a workforce, which is mainly women and people of color, who are 3 times to the poverty rate as the rest of the US workforce, to struggle and feed families with their tips. Thank you, and I'll now pass it over to Teo Reyes.
Thank you so much, Christina. My name is Teo Reyes. I'm the Chief Program Officer for Rock United. I'm a proud Michigander and glad to be here in support of Rock Michigan. Rock Michigan was founded in 2008. It was the oldest and largest restaurant worker organization around the state. This past summer, the Court of Claims Judge Douglas Shapiro ruled that the adopt and amend tactic that Christina explained to us was unconstitutional. The Republicans in the legislature pushed this through as a way to gut the will of the people and not allow the minimum wage to take effect. But the Court of Claims decision reinstated the 2018 ballot initiatives. And what this means is that the minimum wage in Michigan will increase from $9.87 to $13.03 an hour. and eliminate the subminimum tipped wage of $3.75 an hour. In February, it'll provide tipped workers with an $11.73 hourly wage. This increase to the minimum wage will immediately impact over 600,000 Michiganders, and workers of every race and background will see their hourly annual wages increase by over $2,000 on average. Many Michiganders don't realize that tipped workers currently make a lower minimum wage than non-tipped workers. As a result of that, 1 in 4 workers of color and 1 in 5 women that depend on tips live in poverty. It doesn't have to be this way. There are 7 states that don't have a tipped subminimum wage. These include Alaska, Minnesota, Montana, and Nevada. And workers in those states receive a full wage with the tips on top. In those states, poverty rates for tipped women and workers of color have been cut in half, and those industries continue to grow. We know the COVID-19 pandemic decimated the restaurant industry, and it severely impacted workers. As a result of this, 60% of restaurant workers have been actively looking for work outside of the industry. The way the industry has recovered to its pre-pandemic employment levels is by raising wages to attract more workers. It currently pays on average $14.22 per hour. An increase to the minimum wage that'll bring the lowest workers up will help the industry grow and attract new workers as well. This long overdue increase to the minimum wage will finally take effect on February 19th, 2023, roughly a month after new lawmakers swear an oath to Michigan's Constitution and are seated with a new Democratic majority in both chambers of the legislature. Had Republicans not gutted the laws changed by the ballot initiative, Michigan workers would have seen steadily increasing wages instead of years of waiting. They tried to gut it again in this session with SB 1233, but luckily we were able to make sure that bill did not gain traction during the current lame duck session. Michigan workers are looking forward to the change of power in Lansing and an end to these sneaky adopt and amend strategies that have delayed sensible worker compensation measures. An increase to the minimum wage and eliminating the subminimum wage will help our state, will support our workers, and help us retain talented staff. Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer Hahn now.
Thank you, Teo. My name is Jen Hahn. I'm a manager at Field and Fire Bakery and Cafe, which has 2 locations in Grand Rapids. We feel that we have a responsibility to provide the Grand Rapids area with something truly special, and that we are committed to supporting farmers who use sustainable practices in their fields to provide us with the raw materials for our baking. And many of our grains and flours are grown and milled right here in Michigan. We're also committed to the Field and Fire workers, which is why we are dedicated to paying a living wage. Employees are not asking for an increase in minimum wage because they want to buy fancy cars or take luxury vacations. All they're asking for is to be able to pay their bills, rent, gas, and groceries. They're asking not to struggle to invest in their education and futures. And as far as tips go, tips should be meant as a bonus, not the basis of a worker's wage. In the states that provide living wages to hourly staff, poverty is lower. Restaurant job growth rates and small business restaurant growth rates are higher, and tipping is the same or higher than everywhere else. So we're looking forward to 2023 when the will of the people and justice for Michigan workers will finally be served. Supporting the rise in minimum wage just means wanting your employees to not live in a poverty cycle and wanting to see our community start to thrive again. More and more, we're seeing businesses like ours focusing on improving the health and the quality of life of individuals in their communities, and we should be able to support the health and quality of life of our employees too. So paying living wage is just the right thing to do. So thank you so much. I'd like to turn it over to Julie Kibler, the owner of Field and Fire.
Thanks so much, Jen. Hi, my name's Julie Kibler. I am the co-owner of Field and Fire Bakery and Field and Fire Cafe. As a restaurant owner, I do support raising the minimum wage and getting rid of the sub-minimum tipped wage. I don't want to pretend like this isn't going to be a financial shock to a lot of restaurants and that it's not going to cut into people's bottom line, because it definitely will. But I think especially here in Grand Rapids, I know that as a restaurant community, we're already moving in that direction. Most places are starting folks at $15 an hour right now. I know we're starting unskilled kitchen help at $15 an hour. And I think that everybody has to get on board. This is what the Michigan workers deserve. It's long overdue, and it's a unsustainable model of pay. I think some of that is going to come back to the consumers. Consumers are going to have to get used to paying a little bit higher prices at the restaurant and maybe leaving a little bit less tip. But in the long run, I think it's going to benefit everybody. I know that millions of workers have left the restaurant industry since the beginning of COVID. It has been an incredible struggle finding staff over the last 3 years. Our opening pay has gone up. Lots of people's opening pay has gone up, and I think this is just going to help everybody gain skilled workers. And like was mentioned previously, a lot of states don't have a sub-minimum tipped wage. California, Oregon, Washington, they don't use the sub-minimum wage, and they're doing fine. And if they can do it, so can we. I think it's long overdue, and the people are ready for a higher minimum wage. Mambo, what do you think?
Thank you so much, Julie. So my name is Mamba Amisi. I'm the co-owner of Barber Fair. Barber Fair is an East African restaurant created here in Detroit by me and my wife, Nadia. And it's an East African fair that sell and produce different products and then sharing East African fare. So our journey from Burundi, we came to cherish our home, Detroit, that has given us everything, asylum. Our kids was born here. So we're very close to this city that we call home right now. To fulfill staffing needs, we're really close to Freedom House. So the shelter that we lived in, temporary shelter, or, a home from indigenous survivors of persecutors from around the world, the only one in the country here in Detroit. So earning a living wage is a very critical to our employees, because some of our employees are still live or are coming from Freedom House. So when they can support themselves here, they can support their families back home. Without that, that cannot be possible. So we stand in the solidarity with other speakers today in supporting increasing Michigan minimum wage, because I think this shouldn't be even a topic to talk about now in United States of America. And so I feel like I'm very close and then firm to support this idea in that case. So I want to present my friend, Brenna.
Thanks, Mamba. Hi, my name is Brenna Lane. I'm the owner and CEO of Detroit Denim Company. We're a small business located in Detroit, and we're on a mission to make the world's most sustainable pair of jeans right here in Detroit. We always like to say that if you want to call your product sustainable, but it's based on people who are not living sustainable lives, then it's not sustainable. And our work relies entirely on our amazing production team. They're diverse, and we value them, we respect them, they're well compensated, and we fully support them in their pursuit of meaningful, balanced, sustainable lives. And that's why we're here today with other allies in support of raising the Michigan minimum wage. 4 years ago, Michigan groups collected enough valid signatures to put the minimum wage increase on the ballot, but because of some political shenanigans, the hopes of that happening had been dashed. But thankfully, the court saw through these sneaky tactics, and Michigan workers will start receiving this living wage beginning February 19th, 2023, and we're very much looking forward to that legislative change. Now I will turn it over to Richard Rogers.
Richard, can you come off of mute?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, how you doing? My name's Richard Rogers. I've been in the restaurant industry as a worker, say 24 years. From a worker's standpoint or perspective, I raised the minimum wage will help me raise my family and support my family. The sub minimum wage I've always felt was unconstitutional, I would say, because tips are, as someone else had said, should be a bonus and not part of your wage, because otherwise a tip is a bonus, but if it's part of your wage, it's not a bonus. What else? I don't know. I just feel that in the post minimum wage, what is it called for the tips? I don't.
Minimum.
The
Sub-minimum
minimum
wage,
tip. I'm not. I
the tipped
don't.
wage,
Say it again.
the sub-minimum tipped wage.
Sub minimum tip wage. That should be. That should be in line with the regular tip shouldn't be part of a person's wage regardless. That's the way I feel about it. So anything that's dealing with wages and part of your salary shouldn't be right. This pandemic has really set this industry back a lot. For me, it had become a job, because at first it was very fulfilling for me, but then it became a job because I was always worrying, not knowing exactly what the paycheck would bring in. It's very stressful within the worker, and knowing exactly what you're getting helps you plan and support your family. So I am deeply for raising the minimum wage, even at $15 an hour, which is a good ticket, but it's still not enough. Minimum wage you should be able to support your family from minimum wage. Anything above that should be a bonus. And that's how I feel.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. And thank you to all of our speakers for joining today for this media roundtable. I'd like to open it up to the reporters that we do have here with us to see if there's any questions. Stella, you with Bridge Magazine, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, recovering from a cold. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I have two questions. One is, a couple of weeks ago, I went to another press conference held by some restaurant, the Michigan Restaurant Association. They have they're against, reverting back to the original language of the ballot measure. And at the time, they had some restaurant workers, bartenders, servers, who told us that they're afraid that the tipped wage would go away because they said customers might be, incentivized to give less tips, or restaurants might just switch to a no tip system instead charging service charges. And so they're afraid that they might make less money from tips. They're saying that they make, maybe $30 an hour right now. They even came up with a survey that said most tipped workers actually make way beyond the minimum wage per hour. So I'm just presenting that out here, and I was just wondering if anybody could speak to that. Do you agree with that? Is that a concern for you guys? Thanks.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
happy
you for that
to,
question. Teo, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to address some of those questions. So there are certainly opportunities to earn high wages in the restaurant industry. Those tend to be in fine dining establishments where the bill is going to be a lot higher and tips are going to be a lot higher. Unfortunately, there's a lot of segregation in the industry, and so a lot of people are denied those opportunities to be able to access those truly livable wage jobs. And so that's one concern. When we're looking at the industry overall, it has among the lowest wages of any industry in the country, and that's why the raising the minimum wage is so important. The concern about losing tips is a concern a lot of people feel. It's a very emotional. People have a very emotional response to it. But in fact, all the places that don't have a tipped wage, people continue to tip. Like when you go into a restaurant, you don't ask what's your wage before you leave a tip. You don't ask the server how much they're earning before you put a tip down, right? When you go to Vegas or any city in these states, you don't tip less. You tip the same because we tip by custom in this country. So it's an effective tactic that the Michigan Lodging and Restaurant Association has used to scare workers, but it doesn't have any basis in reality. You know, Minneapolis, St. Paul, they recently raised their wage to $15 an hour and they don't have a sub minimum wage, right? And that industry is doing very well. And people continue to tip. You know, when I've been there, I tip when I go out, and that's just the common practice in this country.
Great, thank you for that. I'm sorry, Stella, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was curious if anybody else would want to add to that. If not, I can ask my second question.
I can add to that.
Sure.
I think that it is going to be different for everybody, right? So for our cafe, we have never used the sub minimum tipped wage. We've always started people at or above minimum wage and had tipping on top of that. So it's going to be less impactful for folks like us. But I can certainly understand why it would be scary for some fine dining restaurants or for folks who own breweries and things like that, who are used to seeing those high ticket prices and be fearful that maybe if they have to raise their prices to cover that folks are going to be leaving less tips. But like our speaker mentioned, you know, it is happening in other states and it seems like it's working out. And I'd like to think that we can make it work here as well.
Great, thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much.
So let me just open it up to some other reporters and then we'll come back to you. So do we have any other reporters on that would like to ask a question? Go ahead, Lindsay Moore with MLive.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. I had another question for folks, especially in the business sphere here talking. I was curious, you know, a lot of the pushback has been, oh no, now is not a good time. We're recovering from the pandemic. You know, I just cannot handle another wage increase. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, given that you're all in on it and you're supportive of it. You know, is this something that you do feel like is feasible now? Would you be open to a conversation if the can gets kicked down further? I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the timing of this and coming off the pandemic.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think Christina and Teo could respond to that and then perhaps open it up to others. Christina?
So with the pandemic just happening, the pandemic has highlighted the need for wages to be increased, and restaurant workers are considered like the essential workers and in the back and having to cook and prepare everyone's meals. And it's like the people who are serving us or preparing our meals, they also need, you know, to be able to raise and continue to help their families and to have that base amount, knowing that that's coming in, like one of our restaurant workers stated, you know, having that security during this time. I know it's after a pandemic, but the pandemic has highlighted these needs for, you know, different benefits like the minimum wage to be increased. So even though it is a pandemic and I know we're all, you know, recovering from that, it's like, you know, the word has been like, what about the businesses? But at the same time, we have to say, what about the workers as well? You have to be equally, you know, equally taken care of in this whole industry and serving people and being able to continue to keep businesses afloat. So I know the timing can seem a little like, oh my God, we're just recovering from a pandemic, but now it's time for our elected officials to even step in to be able to help our economy continue to grow and survive from this.
Teo, do you want to talk about the adopt and amend strategy a little bit?
Well, I would like to note, you know, the Michigan Lodging and Restaurant Association, they bragged about the fact that they convinced the legislature to use that adopt and amend strategy, right? And they effectively removed the process that was in place to ensure, you know, a reasoned increase to the minimum wage. Workers would have seen their wages increase year over year since 2018, and it was only because they used these shenanigans, I guess, that we're now faced with this possibility, right? And the question is, who, you know, should that be borne by workers who've had to see their wages reduced the past several years? But one thing I'd like to point out as well is that this might be actually one of the best times to increase the wage, because employers have already been forced to raise wages in order to attract workers in order to stay open. Right. So the idea that they can't pay higher wages is not true. They've had to pay higher wages to keep their businesses open. Otherwise, workers would not go in and work there. And that points to the fact that people's priorities are changing. You know, the experiences they had over the last few years may have them valuing things a little differently, and they're not as willing to go in for the lowest possible wage and put in as much work as they would have normally in the past, right? And so we need to adjust to these realities, and this is one way that this is one way that I think in the long term is going to benefit workers and employers in the state.
I agree with Teo on that. You know, I feel like our industry is already being forced to raise our starting wages across the board just by the natural supply and demand of, you know, the situation that we're in right now. Here in Grand Rapids, I know there was a group of restaurants over on the west side that banded together and said, look, we're not paying anybody less than $15 an hour as a starting wage. And it really kind of caught on, and it was a big push, and a lot of us other restaurants have decided to do the same thing. So it's already happening.
Yeah. Jen, did you want to pop in?
Yeah, I would just like to add, you know, the pandemic has changed our culture and has brought a lot of changes. So, I mean, is there ever really a good time? Probably not. But, you know, what we're really doing is we're changing the culture of wages and tipping. It's going from, is my wage going to be dependent on if my customer has a burnt steak or a great time or this and that and the other thing, to, is my employer taking care of me? Does my employer care about my ability to pay rent and so forth? So really we're changing, you know, the whole structure of restaurants. And I think it's been changing, and now we're just kind of seeing it go faster in Michigan. Change is inevitable.
Thanks for that. Stella, I'm going to get back to your question here in a sec. Is there anybody else that had any questions?
I was just going to add a comment, just that this work that we've been doing for this policy started in 2018. And then for a fact, as of January 1st, 2019, the wages would have been increasing if everything was to go as planned, but our legislature definitely changed the status of that. So by now, even though there was, you know, we've coming from a pandemic, this would have been in place already helping workers. So over these last 4 years, waiting for this, there's so many lost wages just in that workers have been waiting to receive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Stella, did you want to ask your follow-up question?
Yeah, so this is just real quick for, you know, I think it's next Tuesday, we're expecting a court hearing on the minimum wage case. Can you just sort of like lay out logistically what could, like, depending on what happens in that court hearing, what can we expect, you know, from, I guess, courts, you know, lawmakers, like what could happen on minimum wage?
Yeah, sure. And actually, there is going to be another event for media to join in Detroit next week too. So just want to highlight that for you folks as well. But go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, so next Tuesday at the Court of Appeals in Detroit, the My Time to Hear Coalition's court case is that day, starting at 10 o'clock. At 9:15 a.m., we will be hosting a press conference in front of the courthouse there. This court date is for oral arguments. Right now, of course, back in July, we had the win, but it was appealed. And so now oral arguments are about to be heard. We won't even have a judgment probably from oral arguments until like beginning of January. So we won't have a verdict on that court case till later. We won't hear back from that. But the judge, we hope to have another fair judge like we did with Judge Shapiro back in July, ruling that it was unconstitutional. But we're hoping for another win for Michigan workers then. So we won't hear anything yet, but it's just for oral arguments right now, and for the judges to hear all of this that we've been talking about, and hearing both sides. The legislature's representation will be there as well. So we're in for a fight there too.
Great, thank you. Well, we're just after 3 o'clock. I really want to thank our speakers again and the media for joining us. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and hope you have a great rest of your day.